Okay, we are now at part part three. I don't know where we are. Anyway, maybe it's part four. Journalism is dead and buried. So we're finishing out our list of major things that have been rewritten in terms of history of the United States as a result of a complicit Democrat Party and a complicit journalistic industry, media industry, who have agendas to help their causes, and the rewriting of history does that. We're going to talk about Reagan being the cause of massive deficits in the 1980s. This is a lie that is perpetrated because Reagan was one of the most successful Republican presidents in history, and the Democrat Party and the liberals in the media just cannot abide this. So they took the existence of the fact that Reagan was president at the time to blame him for the deficits that occurred at the end of his presidency. Now, he can't wash his hands completely clean of it. He did have a hand in it. It was basically, the spending was his idea. He spent it on the military to win the Cold War, and a number of other things. But what people on the left do not tell you about, what they omit every single time, is what agreement Reagan had with the Democrats. And the media purposely omits this anytime they bring up Reagan and deficits. During his first term in office, the current Democrat-controlled Congress made a deal with him. And that was that they were going to let him spend money on the military, and in return, there was going to be a freeze in government spending. Well, they gave him the money. The deficits went up as a result. But then there was a new Democrat Congress in his second term. And all the promises his so-called friend, Tip O'Neill, leader of the House, gave him and promised him were all dashed on the rocks in his second term. They went back on all of it. And there was no spending freeze. There were no cuts in spending in anywhere. In fact, they went up. And the deficits got worse instead of being reversed. Instead of being reversed, they got worse because of Democrats. Let's never forget that little salient point when talking about 80s deficits. 23. This is my last one. There are lots of others, but these are just ones that came to mind as I was writing this paper for this video. Most journalists are objective today with no bias in the news. Well, in order to explain why that is a lie, I've got proof. And the proof is the rest of this video. So how do I prove this? Well, the old saying, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, I'm going to give you a lot of statistics, but these statistics are not damn lies. Facts are stubborn things, ladies and germs, and when presented with them, most liberals will poo-poo these facts to squirm and wriggle out of uncomfortable situations. But we do not let them on these videos, nor should you. It has been said that the mainstream media, or just the media in general, or the journalism in general, are full of people who think of themselves as watchdogs. They watch people, the government, protecting us, and by doing so, protecting us from any malfeasances that they may perpetrate on society as a whole. The problem is, as we've noted, journalism has gotten too big for its britches, and nobody's watching them. They need watchdogs now. And there are now a number of institutions, organizations, groups, companies, if you will, that watch the watchdogs. They are news watchdogs. The Media Research Center, the Pew Research Center, Rasmussen, on and on and on. There are people who have done extensive and exhaustive research on the bias of media, going back 30 some years, even 40 years in some cases, and seen how it's changed over the decades. When I told you that liberalism or journalism is bad, worse today than ever, it's not me just expressing an opinion. It is fact. It is provable fact, because many scientists, authors, watchdog groups have been watching the news over the last number of decades and watched their decline in accuracy and factualness, I just made up a word, and the rise of bias, precipitous in some cases, become glaringly evident through their discoveries, their surveys, their polls, their interviews, and their research. And I have it all right here. Now, in order to make this go fast, I'm going to be looking down and not at the camera very much, because I want to rattle this stuff off as fast as I can, so as to, A, not bore you to tears, but also to get through it, because there's so much of it. But it is comprehensive, as I said, and it is telling. Liberal bias is growing, and here's the proof in journalism. In 1962, that's the first little thing I found, 273 Washington correspondents were interviewed. They self-identified in these categories. 57% of them self-identified as liberal and 28% conservative, even in 1962. Only 16% of them self-identified themselves as middle of the road. That would have been the correct answer, to either not identify themselves or say they're middle of the road. But they still, even in 1962, had no problem identifying most of them as liberals. 32% of them said they were Democrats, 10% Republican, and the rest said they were independent or gave no answer. 1971, 1,313 editors of news organizations were interviewed. 40% said they were pretty far to the left or a little to the left. 20% said they were far or a little far to the right. 40 to 20. In 1978, 450 correspondents were interviewed. 42% said they were libs. 19% said they were conservatives. 39% said they were in the middle of the road. Notice how the percentage is still basically the same relative to each other, but more of them in 78 said they were middle of the road. What happened in the late 70s that made them not want to say they were liberals, or conservatives for that matter? Government was in a lot of trouble back then. 1985. 1,333 journalists from 51 newspapers were interviewed. 30% said they were libs, 10% conservative. So we went from twice as many to 3 times as many. Just going from 1962 to 1985. And that's still 33 years ago, folks. With regard to voting, in 1981, 240 journalists from top media outlets, 4/5 interviewed, voted Democrat for president in every election from 1964 until 1976, which was 4 election cycles. 4 out of 5 of them. 56 said people they worked with are left wing, and only 8% of the people that they actually worked with were right wing. That's a 7-to-1 margin. Almost half said our social or societal structure alienates people. 5 out of 6 believed the legal system favored the wealthy. 30% disagreed private enterprise is fair to workers. 28% agreed that political systems are oppressive or repressive. 54% said adultery is not wrong. 15% said it is wrong. That's probably because the journalists are full of frickin' adulterers. 90% said they were pro-abortion, and 79 of those 90% said they were strongly in favor of abortion. Not just pro, but strongly pro. And in terms of voting record, 1964, 94% of these journalists interviewed were Democrat, 6% Republican. In 68, 86% Democrat, 14% Republican. 1972, 81% Democrat, 19% Republican. Republicans were slowly gaining on them. But in 1976, the same 81%, it was exactly the same, 81-19. Stalled a little bit. Then in 1982 to 83, there was 1,000 journalists that were interviewed. Different groups. I'm not naming the group that did it, whether it was Pew or Rasmussen or whatever, because it doesn't really matter. But they were done by a organization that were researching. They could have been authors writing a book. They could have been researchers just for whatever. Doesn't matter. 1,000 plus journalists in 1982-83. 57.5% of considered in the middle of thought they were in the middle of the political spectrum. 22.1 said they were liberal. 17.9 said they were conservative. 2.5 said they gave no response. However, the prominent or elite media, the subset of people who are in the prominent or elite section of the media, not just 1,000 journalists from all over the country, but now we're filtering down to the big boys and girls. 32.3% lib, 11.8% conservative, and 8% said they were solidly left, and 0 said they were solidly right. 0%, not one of them. Now, how they thought they could be conservative and not right is beyond me, which tells me they were just lying. They weren't conservative at all. They just don't want to seem like an idiot. That's why partly what's wrong with polls today is people are embarrassed to actually admit things sometimes. Back then, they were a lot more embarrassed than they are today, and the statistics are going to bear that out. 38.5% said they were Democrat, 18.8% said they were Republican. Of the prominent media, 43% said they were Democrat, and 6% Republican. Notice how it turns. The more prominent they get, the more liberal they get. 1985, the LA Times polled 2,700 journalists and had the same exact poll for the general public. 2,700 journalists at 671 newspapers. In 1984 presidential election, 58% of journalists were for Mondale, 26 were for Reagan, versus the poll, the exact same poll asked of the general population of the country. 41 Mondale, 59% for Reagan. So this is showing how out of touch journalists were, but how more to the left they are than the rest of the country. Self-identified, they were self-identified, journalists self-identified themselves 55% liberal and 17% conservative, versus only 23% considered themselves liberal in the country itself. So one can infer from this that a vast majority considered themselves conservative in 1985 when the poll was taken. In favor of the way Reagan is handling his job as president. 2-1 no, journalists, versus 2-1 yes, country. Exactly opposite. Regarding the nuclear freeze, journalists said they want 84% in favor of nuclear freeze, oppose school prayer, 67% said they were opposed to school prayer. The country said 74% no. They were not opposed to school prayer. Increased defense spending. 80% of journalists said no. Nicaraguan Contras. Aid to Nicaraguan Contras, which was a big issue back then. 76% of journalists said no. In favor of abortion, 82% of journalists said yes. Affirmative action, 81% of journalists said yes. Gun control. Can't read my own writing. Whatever. 78% said yes. 1988, 151 business reporters from 30-plus publications were interviewed. 54 said they were Democrat. 9% said they were Republican. They opposing prayer in school, 76% said yes. Aid to the Contras, 75% no. Abortion, 86% yes. Reagan's performance, 52% said poor or below average. 17% said excellent or good, versus in 53% the public said excellent or good. 17% versus 53%. Journalists versus public. 19% said average. Wish to be president. Who do they wish to be president? These journalists from these business reporters in 1988. 27% said Mario Cuomo. 20% said Bill Bradley. 9% said Paul Simon. 8% said Bob Dole, who was the most popular Republican on the ticket or campaigning at the time, or just in general, the most popular Republican anywhere was Bob Dole in 1988, and he scored less than 3 other Democrats. Least like to see as president. Who would you least like to see as president? They said 44% Pat Robertson, 19% George H.W. Bush, who ended up being the ultimate winner. 19%, they were on the losing side of history. 1992, 1,410 journalists were interviewed. 44% said they were Democrat, 16% Republican, 34% said they were independent. This is a 3 to 10% higher than the public to say they are Democrat, and it was 10 to 17% less likely to say they are Republicans than the public. So again, they're not demonstrating what the public thinks or feels about themselves. They are different than the public is. 47% said they were liberal, 22% conservative, versus the poll at the same time to the public, 18% said they were liberal and 34% conservative. Twice as many said they're liberal in journalism, twice as many said they're conservative in the public. Journalists said the black journalists, 70% Democrat. The Asian journalists, 63% Democrat. Hispanic journalists, 59% Democrat. Religious beliefs are important, 38% lower than the public, which said that religious beliefs are important by 61%. The public did. Abortion should be legal under any circumstances. Journalists said 51% yes. The public said 33% yes. Versus abortion should be illegal in all circumstances. 4% of journalists said yes, and 14% of the public said yes. They're out of touch, folks. White House reporters in 1995, there are 28 D.C. correspondents interviewed. In 1992, 9 voted for Clinton, 2 for Bush, and 1 for Perot. In 1988, 12 voted for Dukakis, 1 for Bush. These same 28 Washington correspondents. In 1984, 10 voted for Mondale, 0 for Reagan, who won in a landslide. Biggest in history, by the way. 1980, 1990? Sorry. No, 1980. We're going in reverse order here. 8 voted for Carter, 4 for John Anderson, the independent, and 2 for Reagan. In 1976, 11 of these 28 voted for Carter and 2 for Ford. You see, they can't even be fair about the president. And in almost every case, they lost. So we'll pick this up later on in another